I did not raise my voice. I did not slam the door. I did not sit in my truck and cry in the driveway the way I had when my wife passed 4 years earlier. I simply walked back to the kitchen, poured the rest of my coffee down the drain, rinsed the mug, set it on the dish rack, and drove home. That was the last Thursday of October. My son had called me that morning, not to check in the way a son should, but to deliver a message calm, almost rehearsed, that Thanksgiving this year was going to be a smaller gathering, just his household. Nicole's parents were flying in from Phoenix, and they wanted it to feel intimate. He actually used that word, intimate, and somewhere in the middle of him saying it, I understood that intimate meant everyone except me. I am 62 years old. I buried my wife. I kept working for 3 more years after that because staying busy was the only way I knew how to grieve. I retired at 61 with a paid-off house on Birch Hollow Road, a workshop in the back where I still build furniture on good mornings, and a bank account that my financial advisor describes, carefully, as comfortable. I raised 2 boys. My younger son, Garrett, lives in Portland now with his husband and calls me every Sunday without fail. My older son, Brandon, lives 40 minutes away in a 4-bedroom house that I help him keep. I want you to understand that last sentence before I go any further, because it matters to everything that comes after it. When Brandon and Nicole bought their house 6 years ago, they were stretched thin. Nicole had just gone part-time after their second child, and Brandon's salary at the logistics company was decent but not generous. The house needed them to qualify for a second mortgage, a home equity loan, to cover the down payment gap. The bank approved it, but the monthly payment on that loan was $714. Brandon asked me if I could help. I said yes. I set up an automatic transfer that first November, and it went out every single month after that, without him ever asking again, and without me ever mentioning it, because I am not the kind of father who keeps score. That was not all. When Nicole's car needed to be replaced 3 years ago, the old one had gone past 190,000 miles, and the transmission was giving out. I co-signed the loan and covered the first 18 months of payments to help them get ahead of it. By the time I stepped back from that, they were on their feet with it, and I quietly shifted to covering both cars under my insurance policy. It was easier, I told them. My agent gave me a better rate as a bundle. That part was even true. There was also the cell phone plan. 4 lines, Brandon, Nicole, and their 2 kids, Tyler and Madison. I had added them to my plan when the older one started middle school, and they needed to reach him after school. That was supposed to be temporary. 3 years later, all 4 lines were still on my account, and I had stopped thinking about it the way you stop noticing a sound in your house that has just always been there. And then there was what I called the cushion, $500 on the first of each month that I transferred to Brandon's account. Not a loan, not earmarked for anything specific, just a cushion. He never asked me to stop. I never offered to. So when my son called that October morning to tell me that Thanksgiving, the first Thanksgiving since his mother died, where I had actually allowed myself to look forward to sitting at a family table, was going to happen without me, I listened to the whole thing. I thanked him for letting me know. I told him to enjoy the time with Nicole's parents. I hung up, and then I went to the kitchen and poured out my coffee. I spent Thanksgiving at Garrett's, technically, though Garrett was in Portland and I was in Virginia. So what that really means is that we video called for 2 hours while I ate a rotisserie chicken I had picked up from the grocery store, and he told me about his garden and his husband's new job and a dog they were thinking about adopting. It was a good 2 hours. Garrett has always known how to fill silence with something real. I did not spend Thanksgiving angry. I want to be honest about that. I sat with something quieter than anger, something more like the feeling you get when you finally see a thing clearly that you have been choosing not to look at directly for a long time. I thought about the automatic transfer that went out on the first. I thought about the insurance bundle. I thought about the cell phones. I thought about the home equity loan payment, $714, that had gone out on the 15th of every month for 6 years without Brandon ever once calling to say, simply, "Thank you, Dad. I see what you're doing for us." I am not a man who needs to be thanked, but I am also 62 years old, and I know the difference between being taken for granted and being loved. On Friday morning, I called my bank. I did not cancel everything at once. I want to be clear about that because I have been asked since whether I was acting out of anger or out of clarity. And the answer is that I was acting out of both, and that is fine. I am allowed to feel two things. What I did was methodical. I sat at my desk in the workshop, where I do my best thinking, and I made a list. Then I made my calls. The automatic transfer to Brandon's account, the $500 cushion, I stopped that same morning. My bank confirmed it would not go out on December 1st. The home equity loan payment was tied to a bill pay I had set up years ago. I called and had it removed. The next payment due date was the 15th of November, which gave them 3 weeks before anything showed up as missed. The insurance policy was the one that required the most thought. Pulling Nicole's car and Brandon's truck off my policy would leave them technically uninsured until they made their own arrangements. I did not want anyone to get into an accident in the meantime. So I called my agent, explained that I needed to remove 2 vehicles from the policy, and asked how to do it with 30 days' notice so they would have time to get their own coverage. My agent, a man named Dale who has handled my accounts for 11 years, said he would process it effective December 1st. I told him to go ahead. The cell phone plan was the simplest, 4 lines down to 1. I did not cut the service immediately. I set it to terminate at the end of the billing cycle, which was November 28th. They would have a month of normal service before anything changed. When I finished making my calls, I sat in the workshop for a while. The piece I was working on, a blanket chest in white oak, dovetailed corners, was sitting on the bench, half finished. I picked up a hand plane and worked on it for a while. The shavings curled off the wood in long, clean ribbons. Outside, the last of the leaves were down, and the yard looked wide and brown and very quiet. I did not feel good exactly, but I felt honest, which is something. The first thing Brandon noticed was the cell phones. He called me on November 29th, one day after the billing cycle ended, and I could hear immediately from the way he said "Dad" that this was not a social call. He had been trying to reach Tyler after school, he said, and the call had not gone through. When he checked his own phone, he had a notice from the carrier. He had called the carrier, and they had explained that the account holder, me, had ended the plan for those lines. I told him that was correct. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Why?" I told him I had been doing some reorganizing of my finances, and that it made sense for them to have their own plan now. Tyler was in high school. Madison was in middle school. They were not children who needed to be on their grandfather's phone plan. I said it pleasantly. I meant it pleasantly. Brandon said he understood, and that he would set something up. He did not seem alarmed. He did not ask about anything else. I said goodbye and went back to the blanket chest. The second thing he noticed was the insurance. That call came on December 4th. His tone was different this time, less confused, more careful. He said Nicole had gone to renew her registration, and the DMV had flagged that her insurance had lapsed. She had called the insurance company, and they had told her the vehicle had been removed from my policy, effective December 1st. I confirmed that this was correct. I told him the same thing I had said about the phones that I had been reorganizing, and it made sense for them to carry their own auto insurance now. I told him Dale's number at the agency if he wanted a quote through the same company. I stayed pleasant. He was less quiet this time. He said, "Dad, this is 2 things now in a week." I said, "I know." He said, "Is something going on?" I said, "No. I'm just getting things in order." He stayed on the phone a few seconds longer, like he was waiting for me to say something else. I did not say anything else. He said he would take care of the insurance, and he would talk to me soon. I said that sounded fine. The third thing, the one that changed the temperature of everything, was the home equity loan. Brandon called on December 17th. I was in the workshop when the phone rang, and I almost did not answer it. Not because I was avoiding him, but because I was in the middle of cutting the last set of dovetails, and I did not want to lose my concentration. But I answered. He was not calm anymore. He said the bank had sent a notice. The November 15th payment on the home equity loan had not been received. He had gone back through his own bank records and realized there had never been a payment coming from his account. He had known, of course, at some level, that I was handling it, but I think the reality of what that meant had never fully landed until now. The bank was charging a late fee. If the December payment was also missed, they would be formally delinquent. I told him that I had stopped the payment. Yes, that I had been covering it for 6 years, and that it was time for them to take it on. He said, "Dad, that's $714 a month. We can't just absorb that." I said, "I know it is. You'll need to make a plan." He said, "Why are you doing this?" And this is the part I had thought about. I had sat in that workshop on many mornings in the past 6 weeks, and I had thought about exactly this question and exactly what I wanted to say. I did not want to make a speech. I did not want to recite a list of grievances. I am 62 years old, and I have been through enough to know that a man who lectures his children about gratitude has already lost the argument. So I said, quietly, and without any edge in my voice, "Brandon, I spent Thanksgiving alone this year. I think it is time I stopped arranging my finances as though I am a member of your household." The line was very quiet. Then he said, "Nicole's parents were visiting." I said, "I know." He said, "We thought you'd understand." I said, "I did understand. That's why I didn't say anything at the time." He started to say something about how it was just one holiday, and that I was overreacting and that none of this was connected. I let him say it. I did not argue. When he finished, I told him I hoped they had a good Christmas, and that I would be in touch. And I hung up. What came after that, I will be honest with you, was not what I expected. I expected maybe a second phone call that same evening. I expected Nicole to call. I expected some version of an argument, the kind where both sides are really just waiting for the other to give in. What I did not expect was silence. 5 days passed. Then a week. The week before Christmas came and went, and I heard nothing from Brandon. I decorated the house modestly, a wreath on the door, the small ceramic nativity set that had been my wife's mother's, the same lights on the front porch railing I put up every year. Garrett called on Christmas Eve, and we talked for nearly 3 hours. He told me about the dog they had finally adopted, a brown mutt named Biscuit, with enormous ears, and sent me a photo that I saved as my phone wallpaper. I cooked a small prime rib on Christmas Day, enough for 2, and ate both portions over the course of the afternoon, while I watched an old Western I had seen probably 6 times already. It was quiet. It was not terrible. On December 28th, my phone rang at 6:47 inches the morning. I was already up. I am always up by 6, and I was standing at the kitchen window with my coffee, watching the yard in the gray winter light. I looked at the screen. It was Brandon. I answered. His voice was different. Not angry, not careful the way he had been in December. Something else, something I had not heard from him in a long time. He sounded younger. He sounded like he had not slept. He said, "Dad, I need to talk to you." I said I was listening. He told me they had missed the December payment on the home equity loan. With the late fees from November, they were now significantly behind. The bank had sent a formal letter. He had called the bank, and they had told him that if they did not bring the account current within 90 days, the loan could go to collections and affect the primary mortgage. He said the word foreclosure in a voice that told me he was saying it out loud for the first time and hearing how heavy it was. He also told me something I had not known. Apparently, Nicole's parents, the ones who had come to Thanksgiving, had asked to borrow money from Brandon and Nicole sometime in October. Brandon had not wanted to tell me about it at the time. They had lent them a significant amount, which had already thinned out their cushion before any of this happened. I listened to all of it. I did not say "I told you so." I am not that kind of man. When he finished, I asked him what he wanted to do. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to come over. I want to sit down with you. I don't know. I want to talk. Actually talk." I told him to come at 10. I would have coffee ready. He came at 10. He came alone. Nicole had stayed home with the kids, which I think was the right call. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he had done his homework as a boy, and he looked around the kitchen the way people do when they come back to a place after a long time and are surprised to see it exactly as they left it. My wife's copper pots still hung by the stove. The calendar she had bought the year she died, Birds of Virginia, a red-bellied woodpecker on December, was still on the wall. I had never taken it down. I poured 2 cups and sat across from him. He talked for a long time. He talked about the finances, the loan, the insurance they had scrambled to get in place, the new phone plan that was costing them more than mine had. He talked about Nicole and how the stress had been hard on both of them. And then, after a while, He stopped talking about logistics and started talking about something else. He said he had not realized, until all of it stopped, how much I had been doing. He said he knew intellectually that I helped out, but he had not understood the structure of it, how deeply built into their life my support had become. He said he had gone through their budget in December trying to find where to cut, and he had seen, line by line, how many of those lines had been mine. He looked at the table when he said it rather than at me. I said, "I know you didn't mean for it to get like that. I should have had this conversation with you years ago." He looked up then. I said, "I let it keep going because it felt like taking care of you. I didn't want to stop feeling like your father. After your mother died, it was one of the only ways I knew how to still be useful." I had not planned to say that, but it was true, and he heard it as true, because he nodded slowly the way Brandon nods when something lands in the real part of him instead of just the surface. He said, "You're not just useful to me, Dad. You're my father." We sat there for a while after that without saying much. I refilled the cups. He asked me about the blanket chest he had seen in the workshop on his way in, and I told him it was almost done, that I was planning to keep it at the foot of my bed. He asked if he could see it, and I took him out there, and we stood in the cold workshop, and I walked him through the dovetails and the grain matching, and he asked good questions, the way he used to when he was 12, and would follow me around job sites on Saturdays. Before he left, he told me he was going to call the bank that afternoon and set up a payment plan. He told me he was going to sit down with Nicole and go through the whole budget, honestly, and figure out what they actually needed versus what they had simply assumed would always be there. He did not ask me to restore anything. I respected that. I told him I would think about what made sense going forward. I said the word think deliberately, and he heard it deliberately, and we both knew that something had shifted, not broken, but shifted, and that it would take time to find the new shape of it. He gave me a hug at the door, which he has not done in some years. He held on a moment longer than I expected. He smelled like the same soap he has used since college, cedar and something clean. And I stood in the doorway after his truck pulled out and watched the cold gray street and felt something that was not quite sadness and not quite relief, but somewhere in the particular territory between the two, where most of the true things live. I went back inside. I put my cup in the sink. I went out to the workshop and I stood at the bench and looked at the white oak chest, the dovetails clean and tight, the wood pale and honest in the winter light through the small window. I picked up my plane and I finished it. I want to say something to the fathers watching this, because I know you are out there and I know some of you are living some version of what I just described, not necessarily with the money. Maybe it's something else, your time, your energy, the way you show up every time the call comes, and the way the call only seems to come when something is needed. Maybe you have been sitting with a question for a while, the way I sat with mine in October, and you have not known what to do with it. I am not here to tell you to cut anyone off. That is not the point of any of this. The point is that a man can love his children and still have dignity. A man can give generously and still have limits. And sometimes the most honest thing you can do for them as much as for yourself is to stop quietly absorbing things that should be said out loud. Brandon and I are talking. We have dinner most Sundays now, which is something we had not done in years. Nicole came to the last two, and she and I are not where we need to be yet, but we are trying. Tyler showed me something on his phone last week, some video about woodworking, and asked if I could teach him to use a hand plane this summer. I told him absolutely. Madison has started calling me Grandpa Hal instead of just Grandpa, and I do not know where that came from, but I like it. The blanket chest is at the foot of my bed. On the mornings when I sit in the workshop with my coffee and the sun comes in at the low winter angle across the bench, I think about what my wife would say about all of it. She was a woman who believed in speaking plainly, and she believed that the people who love you can handle the truth of you. She was usually right about that. I think she would say, "Good." I think she would say, "It took you long enough." And then she would ask about the chest, and I would tell her about the grain matching, and she would set her hand on the oak and say it was beautiful, and she would mean the wood, and also, maybe, the rest of it too.